And thanks everyone for joining us. Looks like we have a great turnout, and really appreciate you sharing some time with us today. As you're undoubtedly aware, cybersecurity has been a really hot topic over this year in the news, with data breaches and incidents in both the public and private sector. As many of you know, it's the National Governor Association Chairman Virginia Governor McAuliffe's chair initiative for 2016 as well. So because of this, it seems like the public is more and more aware of what cybersecurity is, something we didn't really think about as a society 10 or maybe even 5 years ago. Election security, ransomware, denial of service have now become subjects for dinner conversations in many homes. Perhaps we're starting to see now that cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. At least in state government, we know that sentiment is getting some traction. So each year, NASCIO conducts a survey of state CIOs to identify and prioritize the top policy and technology issues that we're facing in state government. And it's important to note that state CIOs ranked cybersecurity as their top priority for the last 3 years running. This is the fourth, you're about to hear a little bit more about what is our fourth biennial cybersecurity survey that NASCIO and Deloitte have conducted. We've asked state chief information security officers about the status of cybersecurity in their states, as well as their perspectives and insights on the topic. The results of our 2016 Deloitte NASCIO cybersecurity study highlight the fact that challenges still exist, but cybersecurity is becoming part of the fabric of government operations. The good news is we're seeing some very positive indications that CISOs and CIOs are having a very strong impact as communication and collaboration amongst agencies at all levels of state government is increasing. So while that's the good news and that we are gaining some traction, we also have a large hill to climb in building and retaining skilled resources to tackle the challenge, and you'll hear more about this later in the webinar. I will ask that you consider the results of this story and think about how you might begin to identify and tell the story of our cyber heroes that we have across the country. So if we're going to inspire a next generation of students to undertake careers in this field, in order to meet our demand, we're going to have to give them some role models to follow. So follow along with the survey, think about that, and put that into action as you return to your constituency. Today's webinar, we're going to go over 3 key themes, so emerging trends, and also include a national and state level commentary. We'll also have ample time for questions at the end for any that you may have. At this point, I will turn the discussion over to our panel moderator, Doug Robinson, who's the Executive Director of NASCIO, to introduce the folks who will be discussing our webinar panel today. Doug, over to you.
Thank you, President Raymond, and welcome all of our attendees to the webinar this afternoon or this morning, depending on your time zone. Appreciate your contribution to our event today. And again, we have a large audience today, and that's why we are going to maintain a global mute so we don't have any background distractions or disruptions. So as you can see, we have a very good lineup of speakers today in terms of presenting this information from our 2016 Deloitte NASCIO Cybersecurity Survey of the States, and we're going to be covering a number of key topics. I will be the moderator for today and provide color commentary along the way, but our two other speakers that are joining us from our partner organization, Deloitte, Srini Subramanian, who again is the state government sector leader and the co-author and principal gadfly with me on the 2016 survey, and actually going back to 2010, we've worked collaboratively with Srini, with Deloitte to produce, I think, what is really the preeminent survey of the states in terms of cybersecurity and risk exposure. In addition, we have Mike Wyatt, Managing Director. Mike works directly with states in his practice at Deloitte and has some very good insights into what states are facing as he does analysis and consulting for those states. So if I could, let me move ahead a little bit and talk about the survey for 2016 and what we're going to cover today in terms of our agenda. So as you see the timeline, this is, again, as Mark mentioned, our fourth biennial survey. From the start and inception of 2010, we've seen, again, some nominal progress up through 2014, but we continue to be concerned about the real lack of significant progress, and therefore we subtitled the 2014 report, A Time to Move Forward. Throughout the series, we've been providing a call to action and recommendations to the states around improving their cybersecurity posture and reducing risk, particularly around protecting data and infrastructure, and focusing on things like funding and budgeting and governance and addressing the talent and workforce shortages. And we're going to continue those themes for 2016 as we move through the slides today and provide some analysis of the key findings that we will talk about in a few moments. So let me address now the methodological approach. This has been fairly consistent through the four surveys, and we start with a cohort group, in this case of our 49 state chief information security officers that responded to the 2016 survey. And as any of you know that does surveys out of the cohort of the 50 states, this is a remarkable response rate. So we're very thankful for the state CISO. The chief information security officers of the states all work for the state CIO, and they are in the state CIO's office. And so we appreciate them spending, quite frankly, a fairly exorbitant amount of time on an online survey, almost 60 questions, and it does take some time and due diligence to identify the information that they may need to collect and then to respond to the online survey. So we're going to just cover some of the key items with that survey today. In addition, what we've been doing for the past 4 years is a parallel survey of state officials, and these are elected and appointed officials in state government. We've asked them to answer a much shorter and more focused survey on their perspectives around cybersecurity and also what they believe is their level of confidence around their ability to thwart a cyber attack and how often they communicate within their own organization. Again, 12 associations that partner with NASIO and its alliance have assisted us, and going to provide you with the list of those 12 associations because a number of those officials aren't on this webinar today. As you can see, it's a mix of both, as I said, elected and appointed officials, and they all respond to this short survey. And so again, we appreciate their participation and contribution to the success of our survey for this year. I should remind you that we do have the hashtag State of Cyber at the bottom of every slide, and that's what we're using for our Twitter hashtag for not only this event, but also for the document and report that we're going to discuss going forward. So if I could, let me talk a little bit about the overview of the key takeaways, and then I'm going to ask Srini and Mike to weigh in, and Srini's going to provide the national view and kind of more of analysis of the data. Mike White and I will provide some color commentary around our perspectives, given what we've seen across the state. So we have 3 key takeaways that we're going to discuss today. This is going to be in a really easy to digest format, and then we're going to talk about a couple of other key items at the end that we believe should be addressed by states, particularly around budget and funding and strategy and governance. One of the key items that we certainly want to stress, as Mark mentioned, is the talent crisis and the shortage of cybersecurity professionals in the state IT workforce. And we have some very good data to share with you at the end and what states are doing. I should mention that along this first hour or so, we will be taking questions in the chat box, and we've left ample time at the end of our time today at the webinar to address those questions via the chat box, and we'll address those verbally from our team speakers once we get to the end. So with that introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Srini to provide you with some analytical perspectives on the first key takeaway. Srini, it's all yours.
Thank you, Doug, and good afternoon, everyone. Just as I get into the key takeaway, I wanted to reiterate the gratitude for all the Chief Information Security Officers for providing such a comprehensive coverage to the data. 49 responses mean you get that much better coverage and more reliable data that you can depend on. And another interesting data point, 24 out of the 49 responses this time for the survey were filled by new Chief Information Security Officers. So these CISOs had not filled the surveys in the prior 3 occurrences, and some of the consistency of the data that we see again adds to the credibility of the data that we see. So with that, let me get to the first key takeaway, which is related to the executive awareness. Very specifically, we are calling out that on a very positive note, states are starting to see governor-level awareness increasing. So for the first chart that you see, and you'll also see the type of comparison we provide with the previous survey, and in this case, we are comparing with 2014. You will see that about 29% of the states are reporting on cyber to the governors on a monthly basis. This is a very positive movement and a very good sign. While still there are about 39% of the states doing ad hoc level reporting, but the fact that the governors are paying attention to this and hearing about cyber risks and measures that the states are taking is a very positive sign. And in contrast, going to the next chart, the extent of reporting to the state legislature is not on a more regular basis and leaves room for some or good bit of improvement. And most of the states have legislations at this point related to data breach notifications, but I think the state legislature hearing on a more frequent or a regular basis on the state of cyber would improve their knowledge on the challenges and potentially help in some of the funding type activities. And the third point that I want to talk about in the executive level awareness is one related to a confidence gap. Mark and Doug mentioned about that there are 2 surveys that we do, one with the Chief Information Security Officers and the other with the state officials, elected and appointed state officials. And one of the questions that we ask both the constituents on the survey is the confidence in the ability of the states to protect against external threats. Now, interestingly, the Chief Information Security Officers don't really have a whole lot of confidence in their ability because of all the challenges that they face. Only 27% of them said that they are confident or extremely confident in their abilities to take on these threats, whereas the state officials, 66% of them feel that the states are in pretty good positions to take on these threats. This really highlights a gap in terms of the understanding of the risks with the state elected and appointed stakeholders, and puts the onus back on the CIOs and the Chief Information Security Officers on improving the communication of the risks with the stakeholders. So let me just pause with the initial key takeaway that relates to executive and governor level awareness, and turn it over to Doug and Mike for their comments.
Yes, Srini, thank you. Again, important topic, and I'm going to ask Mike to address a couple of questions here. But from our perspective, this is an area that we certainly tried to improve upon in the last cycle of reports, and that is the lack of regular communication around cyber as a business risk. And as you can see from the data, we've had some progress. This is one that, again, was flatlined for really the first 6 years of our reports, and we've seen a fairly significant jump, and it's important that this has become certainly a discussion. And so I think that we still have work to do in terms of the legislative bodies, perhaps other state officials in this area. But I guess my question to you, as you work with states and certainly your knowledge of private sector, how important is this communications channel around cyber as a business risk in that venue?
Doug, it's a great question, and I think when we work with CISOs, the CISOs that are most successful in getting the message across are the ones that move away from operational statistics report out, such as the number of attacks thwarted on a daily basis and other technical operational type discussion points, to what is the business risk that we have improved upon by investment in cybersecurity and what is left to do. And I see more maturity on the commercial side, especially in those sectors that, like financial services, that have had time and funding, quite frankly, to tackle this issue for a number of years. Other industries are perhaps even less mature than the state public sector. The good news is the governors are getting the message and getting it on a more regular cadence. We really do need to find ways to have the legislature hear a cadence of communication about the program, because otherwise, when there is an issue, right, not if, but when there is an issue, the legislature wants to jump in and help, usually in the form of legislation and provisos, and that very well may not be what is needed for that particular situation. But if there's been an ongoing cadence of communication, so there's awareness that you're never going to eliminate all the risks, but where areas of strength are and where areas of investment are, it's going to be a lot better for the program long term and getting funding, more than one-time funding, get that sustained recurring funding, as well as handling it when something does happen.
So the bottom line here is to, again, focus on speaking English when you're talking about these to elected and appointed officials. Don't focus on the Department of big scary numbers, but focus on getting the message across that this is a significant risk and it's part of the way governments, particularly state governments, do business today. And so I think we'll move on to our next finding, because as technology has become an integral part and part of the fabric of state government today, we find that cybersecurity, in fact, has been maturing and moving forward in that space. So Srini, why don't you go ahead and let us talk about key takeaway number 2.
Thank you, Doug. Yes, it's an elegant way of saying that this has become a part of the operational function of state government, that the cybersecurity is becoming part of the fabric of government operations. For the first time since the inception of our biennial studies, 100% of our respondents said that there is a Chief Information Security Officer position well established and staffed. And we are also seeing consistency in the type of functions that the CISOs are responsible for among the states. So there is a good level of consistency that is coming in. More than 95% of all of the respondents saying that they do the same type of functions, or they are accountable and responsible for the same type of functions. On the chart, you see that the top 5 cybersecurity initiatives, when we ask the question, I think so there is a good bit of consistency in this. The other thing that I also want to point out is a very encouraging sign that the state Chief Information Security Officers are starting to focus on things that they can control. Right since 2010, we had seen that in the governance, the authority and governance, there is always a challenge in terms of how an enterprise-level Chief Information Security Officer can need to influence their policies and initiatives with the agencies, because most of the states operate in a very federated governance model. Now, what we are starting to see is that Chief Security Officers are starting to focus on areas like training and awareness, monitoring and security operations, establishment of the SOCs. Now, this is something that was not even an option, not even in the radar about 2 years back, and now we are seeing that 37% of the respondents are looking to do something with establishing a monitoring function. A very encouraging sign indeed. And similarly, strategy, governance, and operationalizing cybersecurity are some of the other ones. I mentioned about the Chief Security Officers starting to do functions in a more consistent way. And as you can see in this chart, 88% to 96% of the CISOs are doing some of these things as being within the scope of what they do. Strategy and planning takes a top spot. Again, a very encouraging sign, because our key takeaway 1, the communication with the executives and legislature, it really depends on having a strategy and being able to report on the progress on the strategy and how the strategy is being executed. And so it's very encouraging to see that being the top item on the list. Doug, let me turn it back to you to provide some commentary on what you are seeing and what Mike is seeing in terms of the operations.
Yes, sir, Srini. So just a few points and maybe some context around the landscape of this position as well. And this is, I think, a continuing part of the challenges. Certainly in the last 3 years, we've seen a significant churn or transition in the state chief information security position. Last couple of years, certainly more than 50% of those individuals left their positions, and usually for greener pastures in the private sector. So we'll certainly get to that at the end, but this is one of the challenges we have about the lack of continuity, so to speak, in leadership in this position as it's been elevated and now resides as part of the C-suite with the Chief Information Officer. We have the same challenges with the CIO position. Again, it's a fairly significant churn. In 2015, we had 24 CIO transitions and almost the same number of CISO transitions. So I think that's one of the challenges around making progress in these space, even as it's operationalized. Another, I think, there are continuing challenges in certain areas that require an enterprise initiative. And I think a good example is enterprise identity and access management, access control, authentication, credentialing. As they're trying to advance digital government, we want to have both internal capabilities for enterprise IAM as well as external citizen-facing solutions for identity and access management. And I think this is one where we've seen, even under the progress, continues to be challenging for the state CISOs. I think the enterprise authority and accountability space still needs clarification, and in some cases it is not very clear within state government at the executive branch how much authority the state CISO has in terms of other state agencies. So some of that, again, still needs some work to progress even further. So I guess our notion here in terms of our finding is that we have seen progress, we have seen security become much more operationalized, but there are issues that are, I guess, stubbornly persistent that are going to need to be addressed in the future. So that's kind of a macro view. I guess, Mike, and as you work with states, what are your perspectives in key finding number 2?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things. One is, for those states that have not undergone data center consolidation, where the agencies still run a lot of their IT within their 4 walls, it makes it really hard to have a state-level CISO to have purview across that agency landscape and provide prescriptive guidance or standards to those agencies. Even on those states that have undergone consolidation, a lot of times the funding topic comes up, and the concern that the rates from a chargeback perspective are already quite high, and obviously cyber requires a lot of investment, and where's that going to come from? And then when you talk to the legislature, some legislatures, quite frankly, are becoming a little bit tired or fatigued, if you will, with the cyber conversation. They feel like, we've been funding this, we've been funding it for several years at quite high levels. Aren't we done now? And the message has to be, we're not going to be done. It's the new normal, and the baseline is going to stay somewhat higher. So there are a variety of challenges, and Doug, you bring up a really good point. A lot of times there's not the appropriate statutory authority in place for the CISO to really have more than a matrix level of influence over the different agencies. So every state does a little bit differently, but I will say it's a common theme, and quite frankly a common frustration, because when there is an issue, it is the state CISO who has to go down to the General Assembly or the legislature to have the discussion. So I think with continued awareness that this is an enterprise risk management problem that needs funding and the associated statutory authority to deliver integrated programs, we can have hope that we'll have a better security posture across our states.
Agree, Mike, and I think if you look at this, again, the key messaging around the summary of key takeaway number 2 on the integration is that last sentence in there about effective collaboration across agencies, and this is a message that we've certainly been preaching around the importance of cybersecurity being a team sport. and we'll continue to deliver that message. But that is very important in terms of the ownership of cybersecurity and risk reduction. So again, this is an important area of progress that we've seen, and so we'll move on to key takeaway number 3. Srini?
Thank you. So the key takeaway number 3 is related to what does having a formal strategy do to an enterprise. And as we get into that, I just wanted to talk about a topic that we have been tracking since 2010, which is the question related to what are the top 5 barriers in addressing state cybersecurity challenges. And I mean, consistently for the last 4 surveys, lack of sufficient funding takes the top spot, followed by inadequate availability of cybersecurity professionals, lack of documented processes, increasing sophistication of threats, and we just talked about the federated model and lack of sufficient visibility and influence within enterprise. So these are some of the challenges. And to the earlier point about these challenges seem to continue, we do see that these challenges are not going away, or while there are some subtle changes, the top 5 seem to be continuing to stay persistently the same ones. In terms of the next chart, we did some bivariant analysis of using some data scientists and looking at various different questions and starting to look for some relationships and like a cause and effect kind of a relationship. And one of the interesting observation is related to the states that said that they have an approved strategy. You see on the first row, there are 33 states that said that they have an approved strategy. They seem to be having better results in terms of being able to get more FTEs or more resources in general. And you see the different columns, the results in terms of number of FTEs, their ability to get increased cyber budget, their ability to have a better alignment with the business programs. It just seems to be better overall for the states that have an approved and communicated strategy. Now, the row number 2 talks about the states that said that they do not have an approved strategy, and they seem to have even more of a challenge in this area. We just thought that this analysis kind of reiterates and reinforces their need for having a strategy and having it socialized with your business stakeholders and really get it to a point of having it approved and then communicating what is in the strategy. It just seems to be of huge importance. Doug?
Srini, very important topic, and we do have some additional data in the report. I'm going to really let Mike take this one on first, and I'll provide some closing comments, so we switch it up a little bit. Mike?
Yes, you bet. You know, I tell you, one of the key pieces we've seen with the states that I work with is that the strategy gives confidence to the legislature that there is a plan, that it's not just a blank check that's being asked for funding. I think in the past we've seen one-off requests for funding for this particular capability or this particular tool set, and that's when the members get concerned that it becomes a bottomless pit of requests for cyber. When there's a plan and you can show progress year over year, that we said this year we would fund this, and here's what we accomplished. Next, we're going to do this. Then it's easier to get that sustained amount of money to increase your BAU amount, right, to run the new capabilities, but to get one-time monies for the new investment as well as the recurring dollars necessary for the program. So that's both in acquisition as well as headcount, which is almost tougher, frankly, from a budgetary standpoint, because especially in states, red states, growing government is not viewed favorably, so you have to have a very strong business case. And having the plan really backs that up.
Yes, Mike, and good comments. And we've seen this across the states, that again, having a documented plan, having a security architecture, having those regular discussions, again, at the enterprise level. So let me if I could integrate takeaway 2 and 3 to provide some perspective, and that's really around the challenge of not having an enterprise visibility, not having an enterprise solution, and the 80% response on inadequate funding. We suspect in many states that funding is embedded in agencies across the state, but in fact is not visible. So again, the response of our survey is from just the perspective of the state CISO. So their view is that they are not provided adequate funding, and that in fact obviously is their perception, their perspective on their current situation. I think my comment is that the funding is certainly inadequate or is not commensurate to the risk, but in fact those dollars may be available but are simply spread out across state agencies and not being effectively deployed from an enterprise perspective. And so we have a mix and match and a Baskin-Robbins kind of approach to the security spend and investments, and that's something that really needs to be addressed across all the states. This again needs to be a collaborative effort. We've seen many states in the course of the last 3 to 4 years really structure an enterprise and centralized security. So if you look at the patterns of success across many states, and I think back to our panel session at the conference with state CISOs, that's something they certainly articulated, was that a centralized model is preferred in terms of risk reduction and having certainly knowledge of the environment. Where is your data? They have done a broad assessment. So these are some of the things that both the operational side are challenging, but also on the funding side. So we will talk budget and funding later in our webinar. We'll get some real data around this, and again, we've seen some progress, but let's go ahead and move on, if we could, Srini, to another key area that we're going to highlight in today's webinar about some of these strategy, governance, budget, funding items.
Yeah, certainly, Doug. And in terms of the strategy and governance, I think we'll talk about a few other specific findings from the survey. And to Doug and Mike's point, and I mean, Mike, you mentioned about this not being a one-time fund, and then the strategy should state that cyber risks are being introduced every day. The need for continued program related to cyber is because states are continuing to innovate and do more and more technology-related innovations and implementation. And with every one of those new implementations, there are additional risks that need to be addressed. And to Doug's point, perhaps some of those additional risks may need to be covered with the program and business-related funding for that particular initiative, but that could become part of the strategy. Now, looking at the strategy specifically, the chart that you see on the screen, in terms of having the documented and approved strategy, we had a brief discussion about it in Key Takeaway 3, but this is kind of the data and comparison related to 2014 and 16. We are certainly making positive progress. The states are making progress in terms of almost 81% of the states have a documented strategy, and a good percentage of that have them approved. Now, moving on to the next one. So this is an interesting question related to executive support. Now, the state chief security officers, they are acknowledging that they are seeing executive support and commitment. Almost 69% of them said that, look, we do have executive commitment, but the commitment is coming without adequate funding. So that seems to be the challenge in terms of the funding aspect of it. With respect to execution. Collaboration is becoming a central part of the strategy and operations with respect to cyber in state sector. Now, looking at the numbers here in terms of how much state CISOs and the stakeholders are collaborating with other local government, colleges and universities, federal department and organizations, and organizations like multi-state ISAC. This is the sharing and collaboration is becoming a very fundamental and essential part of state cyber risk posture. And the last point is related to confidence in the ability of in the cybersecurity practices followed by third parties. Third parties could be contractors, service providers, business partners who actually deliver certain aspects of state government business on behalf of the state. And the survey indicated that most state chief security officers are still dependent on contractual terms and conditions, non-disclosure agreements, in terms of trying to enforce their policies with these third parties. Now, it's pretty evident looking at the lack of confidence in the measure of the third parties that the states need to start doing more than just having contractual conditions. They would need to start thinking about having some kind of monitoring, like a continuous monitoring, and having the ability to audit the third parties, and actually doing audits and assessment on a periodical basis. In other words, well, trust your contractors and trust that they are following the contract, but also verify. So back to Doug and Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Srini. I would really highlight this third item around third parties and third-party utilization within state government, and provide a little bit of insight from our 2016 state CIO survey, where we have a whole series of questions about the evolving nature of the business models and sourcing options within state government. And we've seen over the course of the last 3 to 4 years some significant shifts from what we call the owner-operator model of state IT to one that is certainly more of X as a service. And I think this is very important. We start looking at the confidence level in third parties. We're seeing an increasing use of third parties in state government, and that is going to grow for a variety of reasons, particularly around the forces of change because of the use of cloud, the state IT workforce challenges, more managed services, more outsourcing, the use of business process outsourcing to deliver state services, increasing use of software as a service on a cloud environment. All of these represent third-party involvement, public-private partnerships. And so I think this is an area that we definitely have to improve on the discipline, continued concern about the level of confidence. And in many cases, again, these are agency-level agreements and contracts, so that needs to be strengthened. But again, the environment is certainly changing in this space, and this is an area where the state CISOs have, at least persistently over the last 4 surveys, shown a fairly significant level of concern that they are not addressing the security practices of third parties who are essentially acting as agents to state government. This is one area we definitely want to see improved. Mike?
Yeah, I think this is a topic near and dear to my heart, because I do help states and a few commercial clients when they have unfortunate things happen. And third-party risk, it's a real challenge, because a lot of times a line of business acquisition of an IT solution is made, right, without consultation with the agency ISO or the statewide CISO. And contracts are put in place that are binding for the duration of that relationship, and they oftentimes lack the necessary terms that provide some level of assurance to the state that there's a good security posture with that particular provider. So having and trying to go back and update an existing contract by adding more what a vendor would consider onerous GBTs is pretty much a non-starter. So one of the things that we're being asked about a lot of times by the lead procurement officers or OGC are, what are terms and conditions that should be incorporated into contracts that empower the state to request information on the security posture of the organization, to allow independent third-party assessment of the security posture of that organization, things like that. To be able to ask or to perform a secure code review of a piece of software that may be being developed. So it's a very big topic, and it's complicated. And this again drives the need to talk about cyber risk as an enterprise risk issue that needs to be dealt with from a procurement perspective, a Office of General Counsel perspective, not just an IT perspective. This is not an IT problem. It's an enterprise risk problem. And by bringing this across the different functions of the organization, awareness that you have to consider this all the way from requirements definition on a procurement through maintenance and operations is really an important topic.
Yeah, Mike, I think your perspective is certainly astute as you look at that, and we do talk about the challenges around the IT procurement and service contracts at NASCIO as well. So we've got a question on budget and funding, and it was a good segue because we are going to move into a budget and funding discussion with, again, some longitudinal data. And I urge you all to get your questions in on the chat box because we're going to wrap up the formal presentation here in just a few moments and be able to respond to any questions that come through in the chat box. So, Srini, if you'd go ahead and take on the budget and funding topic.
Thank you, Doug. And budget is always a major topic and a question that we consistently ask in our survey. A couple of type of questions that we try to track and look at the trend. And the first one is cybersecurity as allocation as part of the overall technology budget. So you see that the states are making progress in it compared to 2014, particularly in where we are looking at states that are able to get to the 3 to 5% of overall technology budget. But one of the challenging aspects is we still see almost 51% of the respondents that the budget being still in the 0 to 2% overall technology budget. And one of the typical questions that's always asked is, well, what's the right magic number if we can attain that we can say that now the states have adequate funding? Unfortunately, there are some research analyst reports that talk about maybe the private sector, it being in the 8 to 10% range. And when we see the federal government agencies, particularly when we include the defense agencies in federal government, they are 15+% of their technology budget goes towards cybersecurity. But there is really no right answer. I think it is part of the strategy and monitoring the execution on how or what your baseline of your security program is and what kind of incremental funding that you need to continue to do the program effectively. The second chart that's related to budget that you see is year-over-year trending in terms of the budget. And this is, again, another area where we have not seen a whole lot of increase. For this particular year, 33% of the state respondents said that they have not seen an increase in cybersecurity budget. And not seeing an increase in cybersecurity budget over a 2-year period, while not surprising for state governments because state governments' budgets haven't increased a whole lot, is still a huge concern because cybersecurity as a discipline is just continuing to mature. And with the last slide, the data that we saw with states not doing as well as private sector and federal agencies, the state executives need to find some way to move the needle on the year-over-year increase in budget. Now, again, compared to the federal agencies, federal government as a whole saw a 35% increase from 2016 to 2017 in their cybersecurity budget, to up to $19 billion. So the federal agencies are spending a lot more on cyber compared to state. In some cases, because of national defense and other reasons, there is absolute justification. But in terms of looking at the year-over-year increase, more needs to be done with state government. And the last aspect in the budget is this is a commendable aspect of what the state chief security officers and CIOs are doing, because they are getting creative in finding additional funding from various different sources, not just looking at technology budget, not just looking at program budget, but they're also looking to do interagency collaboration as a significant area of additional funding. So invest in enterprise initiatives one time and reuse in multiple agencies as a shared service. And looking at federal homeland security, federal grants, and other aspects of funding sources. So again, a significant issue, but states are starting to make progress, but more can be done on the budget front.
Srini, again, you, I think, expressed the challenges here, particularly around what I call the magic number, and I get this a lot. Particularly state legislators, as I speak to them or I do workshops, I anecdotally last year did a workshop for a group of state legislators from across the country, and one of the questions was, when will this project be done? Because we're spending a lot of money on it. And so I said, Senator, it's a journey. It's not a project any longer. It's not going to be completed, and you are in fact not. But I think it gets high visibility. There's a perception in the marketplace, particularly of elected officials, that they are spending an inordinate amount of funds. So the question really about what is the shortfall? I think it's back to the point: is your funding commensurate to the risk? I guess at a gut level, 2%. For the majority of the states does not sound like adequate funding for a major business risk, and yet we know that that's kind of been the again, consistent percentage for the last several years, but that's commensurate with the percent that states spend overall on IT. It's generally 2 to 3% of their total budget is spent on information technology, so it's fairly uniform. But again, if you look at the federal government, and I don't think we want to use them as a poster child, given the OPM breach and other issues they've had, that spending more dollars reduces the risk dramatically. But we certainly know that there needs to be additional funding, and we would argue that it, again, needs to be done under a strategic plan and wise investment pool. So with that, we're going to move on to another final big topic, and then we'll address some of the questions. Srini?
Certainly, and the next topic is related to talent. And in terms of talent, we call the talent area a crisis in the 2014 report, and we continue to see a crisis type of a challenge with respect to talent. And one of the data in terms of the number of full-time equivalents that focus on cybersecurity in a state enterprise, almost half of the states still continue to have about 6 to 15 full-time equivalents. And then we asked a series of questions related to, well, what are the negative factors in the ability of the state chief security officers in attracting and retaining talent related to cybersecurity. And what you see on the chart are some of the top 3 responses. Not surprising, salary and not having qualified candidates, mainly because this is such a hot area. Federal agencies have thousands of vacancies in this particular space, and so is private sector. And consequently, workforce, once they have an ability to get some good training and they have improved their maturity in their cybersecurity skills, they leave for greener pastures. And looking at on the flip side, we said, well, yes, we understand that this challenge it continues to be there, but what are some of the factors that the CISOs can employ to attract and retain cybersecurity talent? And you see, again, the top 3 responses. The first one is related to job stability, challenging work environment. And the second one is it's a new option that we gave, and we start to see a good bit of chief security officers choose that as a way to potentially attract millennials. Particularly young talent with millennials' aptitude to find purpose in what they do. In other words, they give back to the community and state government. It could be a potential way to attract maybe millennials to come and work in cybersecurity. Perhaps they come right after college and get some training and contribute back to the state for several years. And there are some scholarship programs that states are starting to take advantage of, and using that as a launching pad to perhaps get a better career option in future. So there are some options related to that open up some new avenues for the state chief security officers. And then looking at the competencies, about 40% of the state, only 40% of the state has the required competencies, and the gaps in terms of competencies seem to continue. And the CISOs are saying that they are deploying a variety of different measures like training and establishing or bringing in outside specialists and doing some outsourcing of certain specific functions of cyber as a way to tackle that particular risk. And this is a comparison with the state CIO survey. Mark and Doug talked about the yearly state CIO survey, and we just use this as a measure to say, well, you know, how does some of the measures that the state CIOs are taking in tackling the talent gap, and what kind of innovative and out-of-the-box strategies that they use. So we just thought that it would be good to use that as a comparison. There are a good bit of similarities, like promoting the non-salary benefits on greater stability and diversity of experience and so forth. So very consistent with what the CISOs are saying. Doug and Mike, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, Srini, it's
Yes,
Mike. I think one of the areas that we've heard quite a bit with our clients is that it's not clear the career path for a cybersecurity professional. I mean, a lot of times, and we talked about the FTEs being 7 to 15. If you think about that, that's a pretty small organization, and so the question becomes, well, other than the CISO role, what is the path forward to have an enriching long-term career? And so what we're seeing some states do is a job rotation between IT and security, or those jobs where there's some applicability of those technical foundational skills. So it provides variety of experience, and it provides long-term a path for the security person to move into an IT career path should they choose to do that. I think we're also seeing some thought being given to, as states mature their chief risk officer type roles, the enterprise risk management type roles, having some career pathing there. But I think being able to articulate to the professional how they're going to continue to have challenging work and grow in a relatively flat structure is a key question that states need to be able to answer in order to provide that non-monetary value to recruit and retain top talent.
Yeah, good observation, Mike, and one we didn't really include in the narrative of the report, but we see that as well. Promoting the non-salary benefits, given the gap that we've seen, the data that we have in terms of state salaries and information security compared to the private sector is pretty dramatic. I don't think states are going to be able to make up that anytime soon in terms of compensation, but they can do it in terms of maybe more flexibility, more innovative structures. This is going to be challenging, promoting those non-salary benefits. I think for states, my key piece of advice would be to really look at your job titles and classifications. In many states, they are antiquated, and it's something you need to address if you want to attract that talent and give them broader responsibilities. Certainly, young cybersecurity professionals coming right out of college will be faced with significant challenges and get a real breadth of experience, more we believe in state and local government that they might in the private sector position. I think states are going to have to realize that these folks may only stay around for 2 or 3 years, and they have to be comfortable with that. The current data doesn't suggest that this crisis for at least the public sector is going to be abated anytime soon. When you look at Bureau of Labor Statistics, they're looking at negative unemployment, 1.5% below. So they're essentially 0 or less unemployment in all sectors for information security professionals. Many more positions available than candidates. Projection is there'll be over 1 million positions open in the next couple of years. And so again, the salary is not going to be an attractive part of that package. It's going to have to be something else to move folks into the state government sector.
Doug, there's one other piece that we're seeing. A couple of my states are looking at changing the educational requirements for some of these roles and looking at the certifications rather than the degree, because with cyber, a lot of times you'll have young people that have great technical skills and choose a non-traditional education path that would make great cyber heroes, but because of the requirements of a particular degree program for that job code, are not able to fulfill it. So opening the aperture to the candidate pool, given the changing nature of the workforce, is another important aspect of helping to address this problem.
Yeah, good point. And I think states often do, unfortunately, fall prey to that education and experience, that E&E quotient. And really, in this space, having 10 years experience may, in fact, put you at a disadvantage because you haven't had the recent experience with the threat levels and also the morphing that goes on. And you may find someone actually that doesn't have significant experience that could be a stronger player for your team. Because they are more adaptive and innovative. So this is going to be a challenge, whether it's cybersecurity or just the general IT workforce for states, is they are going to have to be more flexible, more open. And again, I think we have recognized states that are pursuing these paths. And so if you're interested in states that have provided some innovative approaches for both flexibility in both the workplace and hiring, please contact NASIA and we can identify that information and point you to it. So, Srini, if we could, why don't we wrap up by moving into our last topic on emerging trends.
Sounds good, Doug. So on the emerging trends, the first one is the question related to the top threats. Again, something that we track, and no surprise here. Ransomware came from nowhere in the last 2 years and took the top third spot in the top 3. As you know, a number of states, agencies, and particularly local governments and municipalities are targets for ransomware attacks. And this particular survey, it took a prominent spot. Social engineering, phishing, and increasing sophistication of threats and vulnerabilities related to non-secure code, again, take the top few spots. Turning a slightly different angle in terms of the threats and the CISO's confidence level, we talked a little bit about in one of the key takeaways, the confidence gap between what the chief security officers see and what the state officials see. And this one is a little bit more involved chart that talk about various threats and what is the confidence level of the chief security officers. And without a surprise, threats originating from the use of emerging technologies like cloud and Internet of Things and mobile, that seems to be where the chief security officers are least confident. And when threats originating externally, because obviously external threats coming in more at the attack on the perimeter, there seems to be a lot more maturity and consequently better confidence. And again, this goes to the point of what we were talking earlier about the business executives and the legislators asking, well, why is this cyber problem not going away? Well, it's not going away because we are introducing new and innovative things. And as we introduce new and innovative technologies to enable business, we are introducing new risks. And this is a testimonial to what the chief security officers are saying. And the last chart related to the study is on the trends related to legislation and statutes at the state level. And again, no surprise here, almost 47 states have data breach notification legislations. But legislations related to the rest of the areas are fairly inconsistent. And this particular chart gives the data in terms of how many states have well-established and funded legislations on some of these topics. Let me turn it back to Doug. Do you want to give some commentary and then facilitate Q&A?
Will do, sir. And just on a couple of these topics, and particularly on the emerging threats, this is something we introduced a couple of cycles ago on the survey, and we've certainly seen the manifestation of those, particularly around IoT and mobile. In addition to that, I would add in UAS, unmanned aerial systems, or drones, certainly being used by the state, although not to the greatest degree yet, but we see that growing. So NASIO has produced a couple of policy briefs on those two topics. Security and privacy are both integrated components of those briefs that they need to be addressed, obviously, before deployment. And that's one of the major challenges with the emerging trends, is recognizing that there needs to be a cybersecurity, or essentially a risk assessment before deployment, that often doesn't take place. It's often done after the fact. So again, I think that's it's going to be important. So we've got a couple of questions we want to address. So we've got a few more minutes if you want to put your chat questions in, and I'll turn it over to Mike for some closing comments about our 3 key takeaways.
All right. I did want to point out one area that's not an emerging trend, but one that is coming up more and more often, and that is the risk of legacy systems and the inability to patch them because of the risk of breaking it. Legacy modernization, having a cybersecurity component, we're seeing that. I've seen that now, I think, in 3 to 4 states, where in a review of the legacy systems, one of the biggest risks identified is the lack of good security controls available for those systems, just based upon their age and technological constraints. So I did want to point that particular out. I saw a couple of questions come in, and I'd like to address those. One of the questions is on cloud terms and conditions. As states move to adopt cloud services, a lot of times the cloud providers have, how shall we put it, rigid terms and conditions that are take it or leave it. And given the size of some of those providers, they're just not willing to negotiate those on a case-by-case basis. And so we've seen a lot of states just make the decision to live with those particular terms. But I will say this, that FedRAMP has certainly provided a framework applicable to the cloud environment, and though it is tailored for the federal side, we're seeing a recognition that FedRAMP, the FedRAMP framework, should be adopted by cloud providers, even if they're not running FedRAMP payloads for those organizations that have a state government, NIST 853, CMS Mars 2 requirements. And so that's something that we've been discussing with cloud providers, because a number of them have a FedRAMP environment, but they don't want to run non-FedRAMP payloads in there, and that's understandable. Another good standard we see that can be applied for the cloud providers is the ITAR framework. So basically the export control framework. It's a pretty strong framework, and it doesn't have the same constraints about payload. So something to consider on the cloud front. Another question came in about the NICE framework, or the training framework from the federal government for job classifications. I did work with a state that applied the NICE framework to their job codes and worked with Office of Human Resources to update job codes and provide job pathing for the professionals, and that was well received. It was well received on the business front as well as from the CISO side of the house and IT side of the house. I think there's a lot of interest in job growth and finding a way to tap into this dearth of cybersecurity professionals to act as an economic engine for the state. We've seen a lot of investment in states like Colorado, investments in South Carolina, where they're actually looking to build a cyber ecosystem. And so that's another area that should be looked at, and hopefully will provide support and assistance to the states moving forward. I do want to reiterate the importance of having that formal approved strategy with a roadmap associated with it in order to secure funding long term. Members are, especially in these economic times, dollars are scarce again, and you have to have a plan and a story that's in business terms in order to be able to secure not only the funding for today, but the funding you'll need for tomorrow. I think I'm going to pause there, and yes, go ahead, Trey.
Yeah, Mike, I just wanted to add a couple of comments. The first one related to cloud, and I think you are right. I think large cloud providers, they don't want to individually negotiate T's and C's. But to some extent, I think even when a state adopts a cloud environment for their infrastructure, a good bit of security responsibilities and accountability continues to rest with the state enterprise. Because while the cloud may be hosting the services and applications, providing access to the data and being accountable for the regulations of the data that is being put on the cloud, and all of those things continue to reside with the enterprise. And I think sometimes we also see the other side of the cloud provider's perspective, which is, well, it is not that since just because we are hosting all of the environment, we cannot be accountable for everything that's related to cyber risk, because we are only hosting your environment. Providing the access and any type of issues related to the access or any type of regulatory considerations and retention of data, archival of the data, and all of those things are very business connected. And so it's a joint responsibility. In fact, it's a three-way responsibility of the cloud provider, the enterprise that is interacting, the enterprise technology folks that interact with the cloud, and the business stakeholders who are ultimately providing access to the data and doing things with the data. So there is a good amount of combined responsibility that needs to be articulated, and that's one of the reasons there is a challenge, because when we try to put it in legal terms, it doesn't quite work out that neatly.
Thank you, Srini and Mike, for those comments. So as it looks like we do not have any additional questions in the chat box, I'd like to go ahead and thank certainly our speakers today, Mark and Srini and Mike, and thank certainly Srini and Mike for their analysis and our partnership in creating, I think, another remarkable piece of work that can be shared with policymakers, decision makers, governors, legislators, and certainly our state IT community and the vendors that support the success in our community. This is obviously a continuing important content that is going to be top of mind for state CIOs and the state IT community. This webinar has been recorded. It will be available on the NASCIO website shortly under our resources with webinars. The digital version of the full report, again, we only covered the key findings and certainly didn't dive into all of the data, but the full report is available complimentary. It's all digital on the NASCIO and the Deloitte website, and so I invite you to download that document and peruse it at your leisure. And certainly I want to thank, most importantly, all of our attendees today. We had a lot of attendees at the webinar from both state government and a variety of other organizations. If you looked at our early polling, we had a good mix of organizations attending today. And so I invite you to share the webinar, share the report, and please contact NASCIO or Deloitte if you have any questions. Again, appreciate your time today and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.